Of the wonders which the infant Jesus, Most Holy Mary, and Joseph wrought at Heliopolis in Egypt. Isaiah says that the Lord shall enter Egypt upon a light cloud in order to work miracles for that country. Isaiah, in calling the Most Holy Mary, or, as others think, the humanity derived from her, a cloud, no doubt wishes to indicate that the Lord was to fertilize and water the barren land of the hearts of its inhabitants, in order that henceforth they might produce the fruits of sanctity and of divine knowledge. And so it really happened after that heavenly cloud had overshadowed this land, for immediately the belief in the true God began to spread and idolatry to be destroyed. The paths of eternal life began to be opened, which until then had been held closed by the demons. To such an extent was all this true, that there was scarcely any province in that land in which the true God remained unknown, as soon as the incarnate Word had arrived therein. Although some of the people came to this knowledge through intercourse with the Hebrews, which existed between these two nations at that time, Kings, IV 17:24, yet a great many errors, superstitions, and worship of the demons were mixed up with it, just as was the case with the Babylonians, who at another time came to live in Samaria. But after the Sun of Justice began to illuminate Egypt, and Mary, most holy, the taintless cloud, began to overshadow that land, it became so fertile in holiness and grace that it gave forth abundant fruit for many centuries. This is witnessed by the many saints that lived in it afterwards, and by the thousands of hermits that made its mountains gather up and distill such sweet honey of sanctity and Christian perfection. As I said, in order to secure these blessings to the Egyptians, the Lord took his dwelling in the city of Heliopolis. As it was so full of idols, temples, and altars of the demons, which at his entrance all fell to the dust with great crashing and noise, the whole city was set in commotion and confusion by the suddenness of this ruin. Isaiah 19:1. People rushed about astonished, as if crazed in mind. Curiosity brought to the newly arrived strangers numbers of men and women who sought to speak to the great Queen and Saint Joseph. The Heavenly Mother, who was aware of the mysterious designs of God, spoke to their inmost hearts with great wisdom, prudence, and sweetness. They were filled with wonder at her incomparable gentleness and her exalted teachings, which undeceived them of their errors. And as she immediately cured some of their sick, she quieted and encouraged them so much the sooner. These miracles were so rapidly noised abroad that in a short time an immense concourse of people gathered to see the heavenly strangers, and the most prudent lady was forced to consult her most holy Son as to her further conduct towards this great multitude. The infant God told her to instruct them in the knowledge of God, teach them his true worship, and exhort them to desist from sinful life. Excuse me. In this office of preaching to the Egyptians and of teaching them, our heavenly princess served as the instrument of her most holy Son, who lent power to her words. The effect of it was so great that many books would be required to describe the wonders and the conversion of souls that took place during the 7 years of their stay in this province. For in her ministry she was filled with the benedictions of sweetness. Psalms 24. Whenever the heavenly lady listened to and answered those that came to her, and that was Psalms 20 and then 4. Okay. Whenever the heavenly lady listened to and answered those that came to her, she held in her arms the infant Jesus as the one who was the author of all the graces to be dispensed to sinners. She spoke to each one in the manner suitable to his capacity and serviceable for teaching him the doctrine of eternal life. She enlightened them concerning the divinity and made them understand that there cannot be more than one God. She explained to them the several articles of truth pertaining to the creation and redemption of the world. She impressed upon their minds the commandments of the Decalogue, founded upon the natural law, and she showed them the manner of adoring and worshiping God, and how they were to expect the regeneration of the human race. Concerning the demons, she explained how they were enemies of God and men, how deeply they kept men in error by their idol worship and the false answers of their oracles, how they induced men to commit the vilest abominations, and afterwards secretly tempted them by exciting the disorderly passions. Although the Queen of Heaven was so pure and free from all that is imperfect, nevertheless, for the glory of the Most High, she did not deem it beneath her to speak to them of those vile and impure excesses in which all Egypt was sunk. She also declared to them that the repairer of so many ills, who was to overcome the demons, as it is written of him, was already come into the world, although she did not say that she held him in her arms. In order that her teachings might be accepted so much the more readily, and the truth might be more apparent, she confirmed her words by great miracles, curing all sorts of people who were sick or possessed by the devil, and who came from all parts of the country. A few times the queen went to the infirmaries and conferred admirable blessings upon the sick. Everywhere she consoled the sorrowful and brought relief to the afflicted and the unfortunate, winning all by loving kindness and beneficence, and admonishing them with sweet earnestness. In regard to the cure of the sick and wounded, the heavenly lady hesitated between two different sentiments, the one of charity, which drew her to nurse the wounded with her own hand, and the other of modesty, which forbade her to touch anyone. In order that all propriety might be observed, her most holy Son empowered her to cure the men by her mere word and exhortations, while she might cure the women by the touch of her hands and cleansing their wounds. This course of action she maintained thenceforward, taking upon herself as well as the office of a mother as of a sick nurse, respectively. But, as I will narrate, after they had lived 2 years in that place, St. Joseph also began to cure the sick, while the matchless charity of the queen busied itself more particularly with the cure of the women. Though she was herself endowed with such unsullied purity, free from all infirmities and sufferings, yet she hesitated not to tend their festering ulcers and apply with her own hands the coverings and bandages required. All this she did with such tender compassion as if she herself were afflicted with their misfortunes. Sometimes it happened that in order to relieve and cure the poor, she asked permission of her divine Son to place him in the cradle, thus permitting the Lord of the poor to witness in another way the loving charity of this humble lady. But in all these occupations and cures, oh, how wonderful to relate, this most modest mistress never looked upon the face of either man or woman. Even when the wound was in the face, her modesty was so exquisite that she would not have been able to recognize any of her patients by their features if she had not known all men by another interior kind of vision. On account of the excessive heat prevailing in Egypt, and on account of many disorders rampant among the people, the distempers of the Egyptians were widespread and grievous. During the years of the stay of the infant Jesus and his most holy mother, pestilence devastated Heliopolis and other places. On this account, and on account of the report of their wonderful deeds, multitudes of people came to them from all parts of the country and returned home cured in body and soul. In order that the grace of the Lord might flow more abundantly, and in order that his kindest mother might have assistance in her works of mercy, God, at the instance of the heavenly mistress, ordained St. Joseph as her helper in the teaching and healing of the infirm. For this purpose he was endowed with new light and power of healing. The Holy Mary began to make use of his assistance in the 3rd year of their stay in Egypt, so that now he ordinarily taught and cured the men, while the Blessed Lady attended to the women. Incredible was the fruit resulting from their labors in the souls of men, for her uninterrupted beneficence and the gracious efficacy of her words drew all toward our Queen, and her modesty and holiness filled them with devoted love. They offered her many presents and large possessions, anxious to see her make use of them, but never did she receive anything for herself, or reserve it for her own use, for they continued to provide for their wants by the labor of her hands and the earnings of St. Joseph. When at times the Blessed Lady was offered some gift that seemed serviceable and proper for helping the needy and the poor, she would accept it for that purpose. Only with this understanding would she ever yield to the pious and affectionate importunities of devout persons, and even then she often made them a present in return of things made by her own hands. From what I have related, we can form some idea of how great and how numerous were the miracles wrought by the Holy Family during their 7 years' stay in Egypt and Heliopolis, for it would be impossible to enumerate and describe all of them. Instruction vouchsafed to me by the Queen of Heaven, Most Holy Mary. My daughter, thou art full of wonder at the works of mercy which I exercised in Egypt, curing the sick of their infirmities and helping the poor in their necessities, in order to relieve them in body and soul. Thou wilt be able to understand how all this comported with my love of modesty and retirement, when thou takest into consideration the immense love that urged my most holy Son to hasten immediately after his birth to the assistance of these people, and pour out over them his immense love in his longings for their salvation. This love he communicated to me, and thus made me an instrument of his power, or I should not have dared to enter upon such a great enterprise. For though I always preferred to abstain from speaking or communicating with others, yet the will of my Son and Lord governed me in all things. Of thee, my friend, I desire that in imitation of me, thou work for the benefit and salvation of thy neighbors, seeking to follow me in the perfection and quality of my works. Thou needest not to seek occasions, for the Lord will send them. In some extraordinary circumstances, however, thou mayest find it advisable to offer thy services, but seek to exert thy influence upon all, teach and exhort them according to thy light, not presuming to take upon thyself the office of a teacher, but of one that seeks to console, and one that pities the hardships of her brothers, as one who, with much reserve and humility and with great charity, seeks to exhort them to patience. As for those under thy charge, exhort and reprove them, govern and direct them to greater and greater perfection of virtue, and to fulfill the divine pleasure. For next to seeking thy own perfection, God wills that thou encourage and teach those under thy charge according to power and graces given to thee. Pray without ceasing for those to whom thou canst not speak, thus extending thy charity towards all men. Since thou canst not go outside to tend the sick, make up for it by taking care of those living with thee, zealously serving them personally in whatever pertains to their comfort and wants. Do not consider thyself above this service, because thou art their superioress, for on this very account thou must act as their mother, and show thy loving care as such toward all, while in other things thou must interiorly esteem thyself below them. Since the world ordinarily leaves the care of the sick to the most poor and despised, simply because it does not know the high value of this service, therefore I too assign to thee, as to one who is poor and the least of all, this office of tending the sick, in order that thou mayest follow me in the performance of it. Herod resolves to murder the innocents. Most Holy Mary is aware of this. St. John is concealed by his relatives. We will now leave the infant Jesus, Most Holy Mary and Joseph, in the work of sanctifying Egypt by their beneficent presence, and return to Judea, which was unworthy of it. Thus we will understand the course of the devilish cunning and hypocrisy of Herod. That wicked king was waiting for the message of the Magi concerning the newly born king of the Jews, ready to devote him to an inhuman death. He trusted for a while in his own cunning, until his anxiety caused him to inquire. But when he was informed of their stay in Bethlehem, their departure, their escape from Palestine on a different route, and of other happenings in the temple, he awoke to the fact that he had been foiled in his purpose. He consulted anew some of the experts of the law, and as their interpretation of the scriptures concerning Bethlehem and the happenings at Bethlehem coincided with his suspicions, he ordered a strict search to be made for our queen, her child, and the glorious Saint Joseph. But the Lord, who had commanded their flight from Jerusalem in the night, also concealed them on their journey, so that there was none who knew anything of it, or that could discover a trace of their flight. Not being able to find them, and no one having any knowledge of them, the henchmen of Herod brought back the answer that no such man, woman, or child could be found in the whole country. This inflamed the fury of Herod, Matthew 2:16, and increased his anxiety. In vain he sought some means to prevent the evil threatening him from a rival king. But the devil, who knew him to be ready for any wickedness, stirred up in his heart the enormous thought of using his royal power to murder all the children under 2 years of age around Bethlehem. for in that way the king of the Jews, recently born there, would inevitably be murdered among them. The tyrant was highly satisfied with this scheme, which never yet had been thought of by any, even the greatest barbarian, and he set about its execution without any of the aversion of horror that it was apt to excite in other rational beings. Having studied out his wrathful plans to his satisfaction, he ordered some troops to be gathered in that region, and privately instructed some of the more intimate of his officers, under severe penalties, to kill all the children under 2 years in Bethlehem and its vicinity. The command of Herod was executed, and the whole country was filled with confusion and wailing, and with the tears of the parents and of the other relations of the innocent victims, who were thus doomed without any possibility of resistance or prevention. This command of Herod was issued 6 months after the birth of our Savior. When it began to be executed, the queen happened to hold her divine Son in her arms, lost in contemplation of his most holy soul. Looking into it as into a clear mirror, she saw all that passed in Bethlehem more clearly than if she herself had been present to hear the wailing of the children and the parents. She saw also how her Son prayed to his eternal Father for the parents of those innocents, that he offered up the murdered children as the first fruits of his own death, asking him also that they receive the use of reason, in order that they might be a willing sacrifice for their Redeemer, and accept their death for his glory. Thus he would be able to reward them with the crowns of martyrdom for what they suffered. All this the eternal Father granted, and as it was made known to the queen in her only begotten Son, she joined him in his prayers and sacrifices. She also pitied the parents of the martyred infants in their heart-rending tears and sorrows for their sons. She indeed was the first and true Rachel, weeping for the children in Bethlehem. Jeremiah 31:15. And there was no mother who sorrowed for them as she did, since no one could be such a mother as she was to them. She did not know at the time what St. Elizabeth had done in order to safeguard her son John, pursuant to the warning of the angels sent to her by the Queen herself, as narrated in the 22nd chapter. Although she had no doubt as to the fulfillment of all the mysteries known to her concerning the precursor by divine enlightenment, yet she was uncertain of the troubles and anxieties caused to St. Elizabeth and her son, and of the manner in which they had forestalled the cruelty of Herod. The sweetest mother did not presume to ask her divine Son concerning this event, on account of the prudence and reverence always observed by her in regard to such revelations, for in her humility and patience she counted herself as unworthy and as dust in the sight of the Lord. But the Almighty took notice of her pious and compassionate desires, and informed her that Zachary, the father of St. John, had died 4 months after her virginal paturation, and about 3 months after she had left Jerusalem. The widowed St. Elizabeth now had no other company than that of her son John, with whom she was passing the days of her widowhood in a retired and secluded place. For on account of the warning of the angel, and knowing of the cruel disposition of Herod, she had resolved to flee to the desert with her child, and live there in the company of wild beasts rather than within the dangerous reach of Herod. This resolve she had taken with the approbation of the Most High, and guided by his impulse, she was now hidden in a cave or cleft of the rock, where, with great hardship and difficulty, she obtained sustenance for herself and her son. The Heavenly Lady also knew that St. Elizabeth, after 3 years of this solitary life, died in the Lord, that St. John remained in the desert, commencing to live an angelic life, and that he was not to leave his solitude until he should be commanded by the Almighty to preach penance as his precursor. These sacraments and mysteries the infant Jesus manifested to us, Most Holy Mother, with many other hidden and profound blessings conferred upon St. Elizabeth and her son in that desert. All this she perceived in the same way as she now perceived the death of the innocent children. It filled her with joy and compassion, the one because she saw St. John and his mother in safety, the other on account of the hardships to which they were exposed in the desert. She immediately asked of her most holy Son permission to take care thenceforward of Elizabeth and her son. From that time on, she frequently sent her holy angels to visit them with the consent of the Lord, and through them she sent them provisions which afforded them better sustenance than they could find in the wild abode. Through these angelic messengers, the Holy Lady kept up a continual intercourse with her relatives during her stay in Egypt. When the last hour of Elizabeth arrived, Mary sent her a great number of angels to assist her and her child, who was then 4 years old. Aww. These angels also helped St. John to bury his mother in the desert. Thereupon the queen sent to him every day his sustenance until he was of sufficient age to provide for his living by his own labors and exertions in gathering herbs, roots, and woodland honey. Mark 1:6. Of these thenceforward he lived in admirable abstinence, as I shall relate further on. Neither the tongue of creatures can describe, nor intellect comprehend the vast merits and increase of sanctity accumulating in the Most Holy Mary through these continued and wonderful works, for in all things she acted with a prudence more than angelic. What moved her to the greatest admiration, love, and praise of the Almighty was to see how, in the intercession of herself and her Son for the holy innocents, his providence showed itself so liberal toward them. She knew, as if she were present, the great number of children that were killed, and that all of them, though some were only 8 days, 2 or 6 months old, and none of them over 2 years, had the use of their reason, and they all received a high knowledge of the being of God, perfect love, faith, and hope, in which they performed heroic acts of faith, worship, and love of God, reverence and compassion for their parents. They prayed for their parents, and in reward for their sufferings, obtained for them light and grace for advance in spiritual things. They willingly submitted to martyrdom, in spite of the tenderness of their age, which made their sufferings so much the greater, and consequently augmented their merits. A multitude of angels assisted them, and bore them to Limbo, or to the bosom of Abraham. By their arrival, they rejoiced the holy ancients, and confirmed them in the hope of speedy liberation. All these were effects of the prayers of the divine child and his mother. Aware of all these wonders, she was inflamed with ardor and exclaimed, quote, "Praise the Lord, ye children," unquote, and joined with them in the praise of the author of these magnificent works, so worthy of his goodness and omnipotence. Mary alone knew of them and appreciated them properly, and she so closely allied to God himself, perfectly reached the degree of humility required for such appreciation. For, though she was the mother of innocence, purity, and sanctity, she humiliated herself more than all creatures, with all their faults, will ever know how to humiliate themselves. Among all creatures, Most Holy Mary reached a degree of humility peculiar to herself, which fully equaled the high blessings and gifts received by all other creatures. For she alone comprehended fully how insufficient is the return the creature can make for all the blessings flowing from the boundless love of God. Knowing that without this humility, no act of a creature can be worthy of a God, she reached the height of all perfection by making all her acts serve as a grateful return for benefits received. At the end of this chapter, I wish to draw attention to the fact that in many things which I am describing, a great diversity of opinion exists among the Holy Fathers and writers, as for instance, in regard to the time of the slaughter of the innocent children, or whether also the newborn children, or those that were only a few days old, were included in the slaughter, or concerning other doubtful points, about which I will not speak, since they are not necessary to my purpose. I write only what is being shown or dictated to me, or about which obedience forces me to ask, in order that this history may be more clear. It will not do to start a dispute concerning what I write, for from the beginning I said that the Lord wishes this work to be free from mere opinion, and to contain nothing but what is taught me by the divine light. To decide whether that which I write is in harmony with the truth of Holy Scriptures, or befits the majesty and grandeur of my subject, or whether the events narrated bear the necessary sequence or connection, all this I leave to the learning of my teachers and superiors, and to the judgment of the wise and pious. Variety of opinion is, as it were, inevitable among the writers on these subjects, since they are guided by different authors, and are each following those of the ancient authors that satisfy them best. Yet more than a few of the old authors, if we accept the events related in the canonical writings, relied only on conjecture or on doubtful sources. I, as an ignorant woman, cannot enter upon such discussions. instruction vouchsafed by the Queen of Heaven, most Holy Mary. My daughter, in what thou hast written, I wish that thou learn a lesson from the very sorrow and apprehension with which thou hast performed this task. Well founded is thy sorrow, to see how such a noble creature as man, made according to the likeness and image of the Lord, endowed with such divine qualities, and gifted with the power of knowing, loving, seeing, and enjoying God eternally, should allow himself to be degraded and defiled by such brutal and abominable passions as to shed the innocent blood of those who can do no harm to anyone. This should induce thee to weep over the ruin of so many souls, especially in the times in which thou livest, when that same ambition which incited Herod has kindled such great hatred and enmity among the children of the Church, occasioning the ruin of countless souls, and causing the waste and loss of the blood of my most holy Son, poured out for the salvation of men. Do thou bitterly deplore this loss. But likewise be warned by what thou hast seen in others. Ponder the effects of passions admitted into the heart, for if once they have mastered the heart, they will either smother it in lust when it finds success, or consume it with wrath at meeting any opposition. Fear thou, my daughter, this danger, not only on account of the results thou seest of ambition in Herod, but also on account of what thou seest going on every hour in other persons. Be very careful not to allow thyself to be mastered by anything, be it ever so small, for in order to start a great conflagration, the smallest spark is sufficient. I have often repeated to thee this same warning, and I shall continue to do so more often in the future, for the greatest difficulty in practicing virtue consists in dying to all that is pleasurable to the senses. Thou canst not be a fit instrument in the hands of the Lord, such as he desires thee to be, if thou dost not cleanse thy faculties, even of the images of all creatures, so that they do not find entrance into thy desires. I wish it to be to thee an inexorable law, that all things, except God, his angels, and saints, be to thee as if they did not exist. These should be thy sole possession. On this account the Lord has opened to thee his secrets, honors thee with his familiarity and intimacy, and for this purpose also do I honor thee with mine, that thou neither live nor wish to live without the Lord. At the age of 1 year, the infant Jesus speaks to Saint Joseph and requests his mother to clothe him and allow him to walk. He commences to celebrate the day of his incarnation and of his birth. During one of the conversations of Mary with Joseph concerning the mysteries of the Lord, the infant Jesus, having reached the age of 1 year, resolved to break the silence and speak in plain words to Joseph, who so faithfully fulfilled the duties of a foster father. As I have already mentioned in chapter the 10th, he had thus conversed with his heavenly mother from the time of his birth. The two holy spouses were speaking of the infinite being of God and of his goodness and excessive love, which induced him to send his only begotten Son as the teacher and Savior of men, clothing him in human form in order that he might converse with them and suffer the punishments of their depraved natures. Saint Joseph was lost in wonder at the works of the Lord and inflamed by affectionate gratitude and exaltation of the Lord. Seizing upon this occasion, the infant God, resting upon the arms of his mother as upon the seat of wisdom, began to speak to Saint Joseph in an intelligible voice, saying, quote, "My Father, I came from heaven upon this earth in order to be the light of the world, and in order to rescue it from darkness of sin, in order to seek and know my sheep as a good shepherd, to give them nourishment of eternal life, teach them the way of heaven, open its gates, which have been closed by their sins. I desire that you both be children of the light which you have so close at hand." Unquote. These words of the infant Jesus, being full of divine life, filled the heart of the patriarch Saint Joseph with new love, reverence, and joy. He fell on his knees before the infant God with the profoundest humility, and thanked him for having called him Father, by the very first word spoken to him. He besought the Lord with many tears to enlighten him and enable him to fulfill entirely his most holy will, to teach him to be thankful for the incomparable benefits flowing from his generous hands. Parents who love their children very much are touched with consolation and pride to see their children show great signs of wisdom and virtue, And even when this is not the case, they are naturally inclined to extol and make much of their childish pranks and sayings, for all this is the result of their tender affection for their young offspring. Although St. Joseph was not the natural, but the foster father of Jesus, his love for him exceeded by far all the love of parents for their children, since in him grace, or even natural love, was more powerful than in others, yea, than in all the parents together. Hence the joy of his soul is to be measured by this love and appreciation of St. Joseph as being the foster father of the infant Jesus. For he at the same time heard himself called the father of the Son of the Eternal Father, and saw him so beautiful in grace, while listening to such exalted wisdom and knowledge in the child. During the whole of his first year, his sweetest mother had wrapped the infant God in clothes and coverings usual with other children, for he did not wish to be distinguished in this from others. And he wished to bear witness to his true humanity and to his love for mortals, enduring this inconvenience, otherwise not required of him. The most prudent mother, judging that now the time had come to free him from swaddling clothes and place him on his feet, knelt down before the child in his cradle and said, quote, "My son and sweetest love of my soul, my Lord, I desire, as thou slave, to be punctual in fulfilling thy wishes. O light of my eyes, thou hast been for a long time oppressed by the swaddling clothes, and thereby gone to the extreme of thy love for men. It is time thou change this manner. Tell me, my master, what shall I do to place thee on thy feet?" Unquote. "My mother," answered the infant Jesus, "on account of the love which I bear toward man, whom I have created and come to redeem, the swathings of my childhood have not seemed irksome to me, since when I shall be grown up, I shall be bound and delivered over to my enemies unto death." Matthew 20:18. "If this prospect is sweet to me for the love of my Father," Hebrews 10:71, "all the rest is certainly easy to me. I wish to possess only one garment during all my life, for I seek nothing more than what is sufficient to cover me. Although all created things are mine because I have given them being, I turn them all over to men in order that they may owe me so much the more, and in order that I may teach them, according to my example, and for my love, to repudiate and despise all that is superfluous for natural life. Clothe me, my mother, in a tunic of a lowly and ordinary color. This alone will I wear, and it shall grow with me. Over this garment shall they cast lots at my death." Psalms 21:19. "For even this shall not be left at my disposal, but at the disposal of others, so that men shall see that I was born and wish to live poor and destitute." Of visible things, which being earthly oppress and darken the heart of man. At the very moment of my conception in thy virginal womb, I made this renunciation and abdication of all that is contained in the world, though all is mine on account of the union of my human nature with the divine. I shall not have anything to do with visible things, except to offer them up to the Eternal Father, renouncing them for his love, and making use of only so much as is sufficient to sustain my natural life, which I will afterwards yield up for man's sake. By this example I wish to impress upon the world the doctrine that it must love poverty and not despise it. For I, who am the Lord of the whole world, entirely repudiated and rejected its possessions. Those who know me by faith should be filled with confusion at seeing themselves desire what I taught them to despise." Unquote. The words of the divine child produced in the heart of the Heavenly Mother diverse wonderful effects. The allusion to the seizure and death of her most holy Son transfixed her pure and compassionate heart, and the doctrine and example of such extreme poverty and destitution excited her admiration and urged her to its imitation. His boundless love for mortals inflamed her with loving gratitude towards the Lord, and produced in her heroic acts of many virtues. Seeing that the child Jesus desired no footgear and only one garment, she said to him, quote, "My son and my Lord, thy mother has not the heart to allow thee to go barefoot upon the ground at thy tender age. Permit me, my love, to provide some kind of covering to protect them. I also fear that the rough garment which thou askest of me will wound thy tender body, if thou permit no linen to be worn beneath." Unquote. "My mother, I will permit a slight and ordinary covering for my feet until the time of my public preaching shall come. For this I must do barefoot. But I do not wish to wear linen, because it foments carnal pleasure, and is the cause of many vices in men. I wish to teach many by my example to renounce it for love and imitation of me." Unquote. Immediately the great queen set diligently about fulfilling the will of her most holy Son. Procuring some wool in its natural and uncolored state, she spun it very finely with her own hands, and of it she wove a garment of one piece and without any seam, similar to knitted stuff, or rather like twilled cloth, for it was woven of twisted cords, not like smooth woven goods. She wove it upon a small loom by meshes, crocheting it of one seamless piece in a mysterious manner. John 19:23. Two things were wonderful about it: that it was entirely even and uniform, without any seams, and that, as at her request, the natural color was changed to a more suitable one, which was a mixture of brown and a more exquisite silver gray, so that it could not be called either, appearing to be neither altogether brown, nor silvery, nor gray, but having a mixture of them all. She also wove a pair of sandals of strong thread, like hempen shoes, with which she covered the feet of the infant God. Besides these, she made a half tunic of linen, which was to serve as an undergarment. In the next chapter, I shall tell what happened when she clothed the infant Jesus. Well, he said he didn't want to wear linen. That confuses me. At this time occurred the anniversary of the Incarnation and of the Nativity of the Divine Word, both of them when they had already settled in Egypt. The celestial queen celebrated these feasts, so joyous for the Mother of God, commencing a custom observed by her during all the rest of her life, as will be seen in the third part, which treats about the mysteries happening later on. She began to prepare for the feast of the Incarnation 9 days before it, in accordance with the 9 days of preparation in which she had been visited with such admirable and magnificent graces. At the anniversary of the Incarnation or Annunciation, she invited all the angels of heaven, together with those of her guard, to assist her in the celebration of those great mysteries and to help her to acknowledge and give worthy thanks to the Almighty. Prostrate before the infant in the form of a cross, she besought him to praise in her stead the Eternal Father and thank him for the favors of his right hand toward her, and for the gifts of his only begotten Son to the human race, the gift of his only begotten Son to the human race. John 3:16. The same petition she made on the anniversary of her divine paturation. On these days the heavenly Lady was regaled with many graces and joys by the Most High, because he renewed the unbroken remembrance and understanding of these exalted sacraments. As she had received intelligence how much the Eternal Father was pleased and obliged by this outward manifestation of sorrow exhibited in her prostration in the form of a cross, and by her mindfulness of the crucifixion of the Lamb of God, she practiced this devotion on all the festivals, seeking to appease the divine justice and soliciting mercy for the sinners. Inflamed with charity, she rose up and ended her celebration with wonderful hymns, singing them alternately with the angels. They formed a choir of celestial harmony, the holy angels intoning their songs, and the Blessed Lady answering them on her part in hymns more sweet to the ears of God and more acceptable to those of the most exalted seraphim and all the heavenly choirs. For these were the echoes of his infinite virtues, piercing to the very throne and judgment seat of the eternal God. Instruction given by the Mistress and Queen of Heaven. My daughter, neither thyself nor all creatures together can ever comprehend the spirit of poverty of my most holy Son, and what he has taught me concerning it. But from what I have told thee, thou canst understand much of the excellence of this virtue, which its author and teacher loves so much, and of the horror in which he holds the vice of covetousness. The creature cannot hate the beings which he has created, but he knows the Creator cannot hate the beings which he has created, but he knows in his wisdom the boundless damage caused in mortals by avarice and covetousness of visible things, and that this insane love would pervert the greater part of the human nature. His horror of this vice was in proportion to the number of sinners and foredoomed ones who are lost by the vice of avarice and cupidity. In order to meet this evil and provide some remedy against it, my most holy Son chose poverty and taught it by word and by example of his admirable abnegation. Thus would the physician justify his cause before men if they, for whom he prepared this means of safety and restoration, would neglect to take advantage of it. The same doctrine I taught and practiced during all my life, and upon it the apostles founded the church. Such was also the teaching and practice of the patriarchs and saints who rejuvenated and confirmed religion in the church. For all of them had left poverty as the only and most efficacious means of holiness. They have abhorred riches as the incentive to evil and the root of all vices. 1 Timothy 6:10. This poverty I wish thee to love and seek after with all diligence, for it is the adornment of the spouses of my most holy Son, without which I assure thee, my dearest, he will disavow and repudiate them as unworthy and far removed from him. For it is preposterous to see a bride overflowing in riches and bedecked with jewels at the side of a poor and destitute bridegroom, nor can true love exist with such inequality. It is clear that though thou wish to imitate me as a legitimate daughter, I, being myself poor, shall not recognize thee as my daughter if thou art not one in reality, nor shall I ever permit that in thee which I abhorred for myself. I remind thee also not to forget the blessings of the Most High, which thou hast received in such abundance. For if thou art not very attentive and solicitous in this duty, thou wilt be drawn into forgetfulness and gross rudeness by the bluntness and sluggishness inherent in the human nature. Renew many times a day the memory of his blessings, always giving thanks to the Lord with humble and loving affection. Especially memorable among his benefits are that he has called thee, waiting for thee, dissembled and excused thy faults, and added thereto such oft-repeated favors. This remembrance will cause in me sweet and strong movements of love, and thou wilt find new grace and favor before the Lord, since he is so much pleased by a faithful and thankful heart. On the other hand, he is much offended if his kindness and blessings are not esteemed and appreciated, for as he confers them in the fullness of his love, he desires a dutiful, loyal, and loving return on the part of his creatures. Praise, honor, glory be to God in the highest. May God bless and keep you.